On February 12, 1969, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate signed the lease at Cielo. The newlyweds moved in 3 days later. Their rent was $1,200 a month. They had previously lived at another Benedict Canyon home, actress Patty Duke's Summit Ridge house. Duke was Tate's co-star in Valley of the Dolls, and before that, the couple stayed at the Chateau Marmont. They met in 1966 on the set of the film The Fearless Vampire Killers, directed by Polanski. Roman and Sharon fell deeply in love and were married in January 1968 in London. But the marriage had many issues, most notably Polanski's many infidelities. Roman had told Sharon before they wed that he could not be faithful and not to try to change him. Sharon learned that she was expecting just before she and Roman moved to Cielo Drive. A year into her marriage, despite her agreement not to try to change her husband, she was struggling. Allegedly, she found a home movie of Roman and another woman having sex in their marital bed. She considered ending the marriage at that time, but when she discovered she was expecting, thinking the news would wake her husband up, she told Roman. His response was apoplectic. Yet Sharon ultimately chose to stay with Roman and have her baby, despite his lack of enthusiasm. Sadly, the last year of her life, Roman treated her abysmally, taunting her lack of talent and allegedly calling her a dumb hag. This was the situation that Sharon Tate was in at the start of 1969, pregnant, deeply in love with a man who would not be faithful to her, and settling into a new home. Sharon pinned her hopes on her coming baby and on Cielo Drive. This peaceful, beautiful place was a nice distraction from her personal woes. To friends and family, Sharon referred to 1050 as her love house. On March 15th, Sharon and Roman threw a housewarming party. Approximately 100 guests came, including Warren Beatty, Steve McQueen, Peter Fonda, his sister Jane and her husband Roger Vadim, Nancy Sinatra, and Tony Curtis. 3 members of the band The Mamas and the Pappas were there, and other friends of the Polanskis, including hairstylist Jay Sebring. A friend of Roman's from Poland, Wojtek Frykowski, also attended the Polanskis' housewarming party with his girlfriend, Abigail Folger. Abigail was a former debutante, the daughter of the heir to the Folgers' coffee fortune, but she was also a philanthropist. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard and Radcliffe and registered as a volunteer social worker while in Los Angeles. Wojtek and Abigail, Gibby as she was known to friends, were leasing a property at 2774 Woodstock Road in the Laurel Canyon area. They lived right by Cass Elliot, singer for the Mamas and the Pappas. Wojtek was a bit of a playboy. He came from a wealthy Polish family and knew Roman since the years of his earliest films. The Polanskis did not actually spend much time living at the Love House. In late March 1969, Sharon booked a film shoot in Italy, and Roman had just been hired to direct an adaptation of the science fiction thriller Day of the Dolphin. He left for Europe on March 16th. Worried about Sharon being alone and pregnant, he asked Wojtek and Gibby to stay with Sharon until she departed for Italy. They agreed and came to stay at Cielo Drive. Roman asked Wojtek to help him with research material for his dolphin movie, and Frykowski sometimes worked construction on nearby film sets, but his chief income in 1969 was sponging off his wealthy girlfriend and dealing MDMA, ecstasy, X, or Molly. Wojtek was made an exclusive MDMA dealer in Hollywood, allegedly by friends of Mama Cass's. To keep Sharon company, her ex-boyfriend Jay Sebring also frequently visited. Sharon and Jay dated before she met Roman, and they remained good friends. Jay Sebring was one of the most talented hairstylists in Los Angeles and cut the hair of the film and music industry's leading men, including Steve McQueen and Jim Morrison. Jay graciously accepted Sharon's breakup when she and Roman began dating, and in fact all 3 became good friends. On March 23rd, the day before Sharon departed for Italy, Charles Manson showed up at Cielo Drive. Charlie did not yet know that Terry Melcher had moved out of Cielo. He went to Benedict Canyon looking for the producer. Manson, wearing a fringed buckskin suit, sauntered onto the property where he encountered Sharokh Hatami, Sharon's photographer friend. Hatami was visiting Sharon, taking pictures of her that day. He was outside, readying his equipment for photos by the poolside, when Manson arrived. Sharon Tate, Wojtek Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and J. Sebring were all inside the house that day. Charlie approached the front porch, and Hatami walked up the path from the pool to greet him. When Manson demanded to see Melcher, Hatami said he didn't know any Melcher and suggested he check the guest house. Charlie walked down the flagstone path to the small cottage. There he encountered landlord Rudy Altabelli. Altabelli met Manson once, the summer before, at Dennis Wilson's home. He'd heard Manson's rap and wasn't interested. In fact, he thought the musician was a leech. That March, when Manson showed up at his house, Altabelli ordered him off the property. Voices were raised. At some point, the foursome in the main house looked out to see what the fuss was. Sharon stepped onto the front porch just as Manson finally understood that the man he was looking for no longer lived there and he needed to buzz off. The next day, Sharon flew to Rome with Altabelli, and during the flight asked him whether that creepy-looking guy came back to Cielo Drive. She saw the man who would orchestrate her murder, and he left her with a disturbing impression, although she had no idea just how diabolical he was. By summer, Sharon had returned from her overseas filming and was now approaching her third trimester. She found Gibby and Wojtek firmly ensconced at Cielo Drive. They were both increasingly becoming addicted to the steady stream of drugs available to them, courtesy of Folger's family's money. Sharon and Gibby, however, enjoyed an easy, relaxed friendship, although Wojtek often tested Sharon's patience, like the time he ran over her little Yorkie, Prudence. Sharon had also grown close with her neighbor, heiress Doris Duke. Duke, the daughter of a man who made his fortune in tobacco and energy, was a highly eccentric woman then in her late 50s. Twice married and divorced, Duke also boasted a legendary list of great lovers, including General George S. Patton. Doris lived at Falcon Lair, the palatial Spanish colonial revival mansion built by Rudolph Valentino. Doris much enjoyed the company of the younger woman and Sharon's natural goodness and gentle humor. Doris liked to take Sharon shopping on Rodeo Drive, where Sharon was naturally most interested in gifts for the baby. By August 1st, Sharon was 8 months pregnant, uncomfortable, and deeply missing her husband. They spoke every day while Roman was in London finalizing plans to shoot his upcoming film. Wojtek and Gibby made plans to return to their Woodstock house as soon as Roman came home. Friday, August 8, 1969, was a busy day at 10050 Cielo Drive. It was the day before Sharon's scheduled baby shower, and the expectant mom was in nesting mode, despite the 90-degree temperatures. Her housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, arrived at 8 o'clock a.m. Miss Chapman had worked for Sharon and Roman since the spring of '68, when the Polanskis rented Patty Duke's Beverly Crest house. Winifred lived in the city and took public transportation to and from work, so she often stayed overnight at Cielo for convenience. She and Sharon enjoyed an easy, relaxed relationship, and that day, Sharon asked Winifred if she would prefer to stay over. It was so terribly hot, and Sharon knew that Miss Chapman didn't have air conditioning in her home. But Winifred declined, to her eternal gratitude. At 8:30 in the morning, a handyman arrived to paint the nursery. He stayed several hours, leaving a window open to air out the fumes. The screen was in place. At 11 a.m., Roman phoned Sharon.
She wanted to know if I wanted a birthday party. I said yes, let's hold one. She said a little kitten had come in from the hills, and she was trying to feed it with an eyedropper.
At noon, gardeners Tom and Dave, brothers, arrived. They mowed the lawn and groomed the hedges. Sharon planned to host her shower outside if temperatures cooled. While they worked, Winifred continued cleaning the house. Sharon's new puppy and Gibby and Wojtek's Dalmatian had been scampering about the place, leaving paw prints on the white farmhouse door. Miss Chapman washed the door down with soap and water during the noon hour. At 12:30, Sharon's friends Joanna Pettit and Barbara Lewis arrived for lunch. Gibby and Wojtek joined them, as did Winifred. It was a long, leisurely meal, with the guests departing at 3:30. One of the gardeners left at 3:45 p.m. Jay Sebring called shortly thereafter to speak with Sharon. Gibby left to run errands, including her weekly visit with a psychiatrist. Wojtek left at 4 p.m., visited Jay at his studio, and then picked up the keys for the Woodstock house. With Roman's impending return, Wojtek and Abigail planned to return to it by mid-month. The remaining gardener signed for a delivery at 4:30 p.m. It was Sharon's 2 steamer trunks, sent from Europe. Sharon was napping when the delivery arrived, and the gardener stepped in to let the woman rest. The trunks were placed in the living room, adjacent the entryway from the dining room, stacked at an angle. The second gardener left at 4:45 p.m., giving Winifred a ride to her bus station. At 6 p.m., Sharon was awake from her siesta. She spoke again to Jay, who said he would come over. At 6:30 p.m., a bicycle that Abigail purchased was delivered. Jay arrived at approximately the same time as the delivery. Within a few moments, both Gibby and Wojtek returned. Early in the evening, Sharon's younger sister Deborah called and asked to come over, but Sharon declined as she was tired. The four, Sharon, Jay, Wojtek, and Abigail, spent the evening at home, followed by a late dinner at El Coyote, the Mexican restaurant on Beverly Boulevard. They arrived back at Cielo Drive shortly before 11 p.m. when Abigail took a phone call from her mother. After the call, she went to her bedroom. There, she changed into a long white nightgown and laid down to read. Sharon and Jay retreated to the master bedroom, where Sharon slipped into a bikini bathing suit and a sheer peignoir layered over the swimsuit. It was all she could do to keep cool that sultry evening. Wojtek remained in the living room and began to nap on the sofa. But Sharon and her house guests were not the only residents at Cielo Drive that summer. There was one other person living on the property. William Garrettson was 19, from Ohio, and lived in the guest house. He met property owner Rudy Altabelli the previous spring, and Altabelli invited Garrettson to stay in the guest house and work as the caretaker. For his services, he was paid $35 weekly, and his responsibilities included caring for Altabelli's 3 dogs. That Friday night, Garrettson hitchhiked down to the Sunset Strip. He purchased a TV dinner from Turner's drugstore, plus a Coke and a pack of cigarettes. He walked around for a while, then started back toward Benedict Canyon. He was picked up hitchhiking by a group of female hippies who dropped him off at the gate to 10050 around 10 p.m. Around 11:30 p.m., there was a knock at Bill's door. An acquaintance, Stephen Parent, came by carrying a clock radio. He needed extra cash and hoped to sell a Sony AM/FM Digimatic clock radio. Steve brought it with him when he stopped by to see Garrettson, hoping the 19-year-old would be interested. Bill declined to buy the radio. They sat talking and sharing a beer. Then Parent borrowed Bill's phone to call another friend, still hoping to unload the radio. According to Gerritsen, after the call, Steve unplugged the radio, said goodbye to Bill, and left the caretaker's cottage. He walked out to his car, his father's 1966 AMC Rambler. As Steve drove down the driveway, Gerritsen heard the dogs barking outside. Then he heard several popping noises. It sounded like fireworks. Unbeknownst to the residents at Cielo Drive, sometime after midnight, 4 killers approached the gate. Charles Tex Watson, Susan Sadie Atkins, Patricia Katie Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Stephen Parent was driving toward the gate as the 4 lay in wait. He paused to open the button for the gate, and there was assaulted by Watson. Steve Parent was shot 4 times and slashed with a knife. The killers pushed the car aside and approached the main house. The murders at Cielo Drive have been written about and discussed at length, including in my book, The Manson Family, More to the Story. Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, and Sharon Tate were terrorized, assaulted, and brutally murdered. Sharon's 10050 Cielo Drive was sold to real estate investor John Press for $1.6 million. 3 years later, Press sold the house to another investor, Alvin Weintraub, for $2.25 million. Weintraub then rented the house to musician Trent Reznor of the band 9 Inch Nails. Reznor knew the history of the house, although he later feigned ignorance with one of Sharon's sisters, and he built a recording studio inside, naming it Le Pig, in honor of the bloody script left by killer Susan Atkins in 1969. 9 Inch Nails recorded their album The Downward Spiral at Le Pig in 1994, and Marilyn Manson also booked the studio for his album Portrait of an American Family. Reznor later admitted that he experienced some strange things at the property during the 2 years he resided there.
The first night was terrifying. By then I knew all about the place. I'd read all the books about the Manson murders. So I walked the place at night and everything was dark and I was like, holy Jesus, that's where it happened. Scary. I jumped a mile at every sound, even if it was an owl. I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a coyote looking in the window at me. I thought, I'm not going to make it.
Reznor moved out of 10050 in '94, taking the front door with him. It is allegedly at his New Orleans recording studio today. The Love House was demolished that year. A new house was built at the property in 1996, and the address was formally changed to 10066 Cielo Drive to keep the looky-loos unsuccessfully away. The new house was a Mediterranean-style mansion, 6 times larger than the original house, that owner Alvin Weintraub named Villa Bella. Villa Bella boasted 9 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, a wine cellar, and private screening room. He then attempted to sell the property in 1998, but took it off the market. He tried again in 2002. The property bore no resemblance to the house where Sharon Tate and 4 others were savagely murdered, but Weintraub could not get the return on his investment he had desired. Sometime before 2010, Hollywood producer Jeff Franklin bought 10066 Cielo Drive for an undisclosed amount of money. He loved the setting, the privacy, but hated the design of Weintraub's Villa Bella. So Franklin hired architect Richard Landry to raze the property and build a new home. Inspired by villas in southern Spain, the new Andalusian mansion features a 15-car garage, 6 bars, 2 swimming pools, and an Elvis museum. The set used as 10050 Cielo Drive in Quentin Tarantino's 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is not, of course, the property where Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski lived in 1969. Tarantino toured several properties in areas around Benedict Canyon with Scott Michaels, owner of Dearly Departed Tours, which takes visitors around several famous crime scenes in Hollywood. To capture the look of 1969's Sunset Strip, Tarantino utilized the talents of historian Allison Martino. Together they worked with other production teams to bring the look and feel of the late 60s to a whole new audience. They were able to film in 3 key locations: the Musso and Frank Grill, El Coyote Cafe, where Sharon and her friends ate their last meal, and the Playboy Mansion. Crews were also able to film on Cielo Drive for the outdoor street shots after wooing a coalition of Cielo residents. But they had to find replacements for 2 other key locations, the Spawn Movie Ranch and Sharon's house. In the end, Tarantino used 3 different homes in Canyon Country to shoot the Cielo Drive scenes. Some say that Benedict Canyon is haunted, with the ghosts of Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojtek Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. Reports of a woman's screams, of ghostly apparitions, have been whispered for years. But the house was haunted long before the Manson family arrived with their knives to creepy crawl the House of Love.